For more on the topic, Shraysi sat down with Frank Bruni, who is the New York Times columnist and author of Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. He starts by explaining how college acceptance letters have evolved into much more than just a letter.
I think a lot of parents and a lot of students feel like what happens on those last days of March and those first days of April, when Georgetown and Duke and Northwestern and Stanford say yes or no, is a verdict on how worthy they are as a human being. Parents see it as a report card on their parenting, at least some parents do. Kids think it's a harbinger of what kind of life they're going to lead, and they also feel like it is the sort of utmost measuring stick of how worthy they are and how talented they are. It's crazy because colleges are using a very particular set of metrics, and that set of metrics may not be a set that favors you, that plays to your skills. We also know, all of us, that people hit their strides at different points in life. There are a lot of late bloomers. I profile quite a number of them in my book. And you may not be blooming when you're 16, 17, when you're in the years of high school that college admissions counselors are going to judge you by. You may not bloom in college. You may bloom even later than that. So I'm just saying, let's not invest too much importance, too much anxiety on these very few years of life and on a very particular set of metrics.
The U.S. college system is very heavily reliant on rankings. In fact, I could say borderline obsessed about ranking colleges, who's number one, number two, number three. Who's to blame for this process? Is it the colleges themselves, or perhaps the parents and the students who buy into the whole ranking system?
There are so many guilty parties. I think it begins with parents, and I don't mean that cruelly. Parents want to do the best by their kids, and they have convinced themselves that working their kids into a state of high anxiety to get into one of these incredibly elite institutions is doing the best by their kids. But they're driving a lot of this, and then the colleges are participating in it and aggravating it. They're tailoring themselves to please the gods of U.S. News and World Report. They're doing everything they can to game those rankings. They're trumpeting those rankings. And then even beyond those rankings, they're using their acceptance rates as their kind of main bragging rights in the world.
But these very few years of life, surely there's value, because when you graduate from an Ivy League school, people look at you in a certain way, they approach you in a certain way, treat you in a certain way, recruiters come knocking on your door. Surely there is merit in that, isn't there?
Well, merit's a curious word to use. There is an advantage in going to some of these schools. Absolutely. It's an advantage that's larger in certain industries than in other industries. It's an advantage that's immediate right after you get out, but that I think diminishes over time. My beef is with the way we portray the magnitude of that advantage and the duration of that advantage. As I said, it's a slight advantage, maybe a little bit more than slight, in the immediate future right after college. But you know, once you're out 10, 15 years, nobody's asking you any longer where you went to college. And if you didn't translate that advantage right at the end of college into something more permanent, 10, 15 years down the road, it's not going to matter much.
If you look at the last two U.S. presidents, one graduated from Harvard, another from Yale. In fact, Harvard has produced 6 presidents of the United States, and since 1988, all the presidents in the U.S. have had an Ivy League education. What does that say?
It says much less than you think it does. It says, let's take the 2 Bushes. You're including them in your count. They both went to Yale. How did they end up at Yale? Well, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, talented men, absolutely. They ended up at Yale because their forebear, Prescott Bush, went to Yale, because they came from a background of privilege, affluence, because they were legacies. So did Yale make those men presidents, or was Yale an inevitable stop on the road to the presidency, a road that was paved by forces other than the Yale degree? You mentioned Obama. Obama didn't start in the Ivy League. If parents and kids are approaching that moment in late March, early April, when they get yeses and nos, and when they end up deciding where they're going to school, if they're treating that as the great culling and the great decider, well, at that moment, Obama was bound for and went to Occidental College in Los Angeles, a decidedly much less selective place than where he ended up, Columbia, and Harvard came into the picture only in law school, which proves my point. People hit their strides at different moments. No one juncture is irrevocable.
In your book, you took a look at some of the top Fortune 500 CEOs in America, and you noticed that a significant majority of them did not come from a Ivy League school. What were some of the key findings in the research that you undertook?
Well, Ivy League graduates and graduates of selective schools are overrepresented vis-a-vis how many kids go to those schools. In corner offices and in the Fortune 500 CEO offices and all of that. They don't have the majority, and there are so many men and women from schools that nobody bows down before, from schools that don't make people's hearts race and their knees go weak, that what it tells you is what we should never have lost sight of. You can get to the summit by many different paths, and there are many different summits. And what really drives me crazy about the craziness of the college admissions process is it seems to be something during which we throw all common sense out the window. The common sense that there are many paths to where you want to go, the common sense that people bloom at different stages in life, the common sense that not every atmosphere, environment is right for everybody. We forget all those things, which are just obvious truths as we get caught up in this mania. And we need to really check ourselves and calm down.